So I think we're about ready to get going. What a good group you are. I didn't even have to tell you to quiet down. You did it automatically. You've been trained, haven't you? Hello, everybody. Good to have you back for week 2. So if everybody got the handout, if some of you weren't here last week, we're talking about there's a time for everything. Okay, I can really hear myself coming up here. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. So as we were talking about a time for everything, the first thing we were looking at is there is a time to plant. And that, again, is the idea of nurturing. So as the farmer plants seeds, we plant the seeds of love. So let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus, you have implanted your love in our hearts, and you have called us to plant that love that you have given to us in the hearts of others. So may we plant that seed in the hearts of those that we know, and then raise our eyes, Lord, to also plant that seed in those that we don't know, and those that we have not yet become acquainted with. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So last week when we were talking about planting the seed, again, you're looking at this farmer with a corn planter. I have to tell you that this is really kind of old tech here. If you look at the planters that farmers have today, they are much more high tech. And what you'll see today is the person who's sitting in the tractor that pulls the planter is surrounded by computer screens. And every one of those screens is telling this farmer something. So one of the screens is telling him how many seeds are being planted, and it's telling him the depth that they're being planted. And another screen is telling him how much fertilizer is being applied, how much weed killer. So it is extremely sophisticated. And the tractor itself is driven by GPS. So once you get started, the GPS takes over, and you could watch videos. You could listen to classical music, and keep your eye on the screens just in case something happens to go wrong. But the image that you have is that this is all highly controlled. And so what's the science behind that? Why do the farmers want to control everything? What's the end game here?
Maximize the yield of the crop.
Maximize, that's what it's all about. So if those seeds go where they're supposed to go, and all of the other things happen, and then the weather cooperates, you are going to get this maximum yield. And so you'll hear these farmers, if they do videos, who are saying, yeah, you know, this is a pretty good field. I got 300 bushels per acre. And I'm kind of like, whoa, because when my father was first farming, he would get like 60 bushels per acre. So you can just see how when you're, able to maximize, you get a better yield. That intrigues me, because when you and I think about nurturing, when we think about loving other people, that's really in the back of our minds. We're trying to maximize too, aren't we? We want to get a return on our investment. So when you're playing with your child and you're loving that kid and the kid loves you back, hey, that's it, isn't it? That's maximizing. So whether we think about it or not, I think that is really a high priority in all of our lives. That we kind of look at people and in the back of our mind we're saying, if I love you, is something going to happen? If I love you, am I going to get some love back, or is something good going to happen in you? And if I look at you and say, I don't think this is really worth my time, then we're not going to invest in that person. So I just want you to be thinking about that, because I want to challenge that thinking that's kind of lurking around there in our hearts as we go about this business of nurturing. The other thing we talked about last time, we were talking about nurturing children, and then as we grow up, then we're nurturing other people in the family. So it was pretty much kind of family oriented. And in my mind I was thinking, not everybody is in that family environment. We also have people who are single, and yet they also are out there, and they are in an environment, they are working with people, they are also nurturing. So I kind of wanted to raise up that perspective also. So I talked to Catherine before class started today, and I said, could I do a little interview? And she graciously consented.
Hiding in the corner.
You're hiding in the corner, yeah. And you got your snacks there.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask you, Catherine, where do you work, and who is the audience that you interact with?
Sure. So I'm Catherine. I work at Wisconsin Lutheran College, teaching biology. So have great coworkers. Faculty is very supportive, and students. I do like interacting with the students as well. So that's my immediate work environment.
Okay, so you have students and you have faculty, and then outside of work, who's your circle there?
I am blessed immediately, with family, with parents, and they're not immediately in the area, but still, phones and all technology, still keeping good contact with them. I've been blessed to have a really strong friend group, both from college and also here. St. John's is wonderful with choir and all the committees and just, Bible study. Bible study is great. So a lot of friends through church and friends through college, but we share faith and we play Frisbee, and it's great. So.
Okay. So how do friends nurture each other when they get together?
You listen to each other's struggles and support and encourage and just laugh and exercise together. But yeah, just support each other, and same way you would with families. It's the family that you choose, right? So we feel like we have a good family.
Yeah, there's not just blood family, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what I think about is this is really true of everybody, isn't it? As you're wandering around and you're meeting people, and you start to find out who they are, what their background is, where they came from. There are a lot of us who are in Catherine's situation, who have this very rich life and who have interactions. So she's talking with students. Students certainly need a lot of nurture, don't they? And I think, the typical college student is always under time pressures. They got papers to do. They got stuff to read. They're behind. And so they suck up to the professor. Like, I'm going to be late, and are you going to dock me? So nurture takes many forms, doesn't it? It really has a lot of different shapes to it. So when you're talking with that student, that may look a little different than when you're talking with friends. I see a lot of singles who do hang out. I know they do things like they'll have clubs that they belong to, or they'll have places like Hollanders, they have a couple of beers and then they'll play some games and they will interact with each other. And I liked what you said too about listening. You listen to each other. So let me just get hooked back up here. So when young people are in the workforce, again, there are many struggles there, aren't there? I read a lot too about young people who, really like their job, and then they get downsized, they lose their job, and then they have to think about trying to move to another part of the country, or, what am I going to do now? So there are all kinds of things going on in that area too. So I want you to think about how big this idea of nurture is. How many different kinds of situations, how many different kinds of places are people in where they need somebody to talk to? So again, as we look at the technology and maximizing, what God really does is the opposite. And here I want you to think about the parable of the sower and the seed. So you kind of remember in that parable, it says a sower went out to sow his seed. And so the image is that he's got this bag of grain around his waist, and he reaches in with his hand, and he sows. He casts it out there. That's very different from the corn planter, isn't it? All right, so he's throwing it out there. Well, where does the seed fall? What kind of ground is out there? Just throw it. If you remember the parable, Jesus talks about 4 different kinds of places where the seed falls. So good ground, it's like the farmer's field, that's one. Sue?
Shallow ground, hard ground, and rocky ground.
Yeah. So, okay, let's do the shallow ground. So that's where, you've got some soil, but it's not very deep. And so the seed is going to do okay in that shallow ground until what happens?
It gets hot and there's not enough moisture for them to survive.
Okay. So moisture is one problem with shallow soil. The other problem is that the seed has roots. And so as the roots grow down, they say, whoa, can't go any further. It's too shallow. This is hard ground here. This is rock. And so because it can't establish a root system, then the plant withers. It can't go anywhere. So that's the shallow soil. And then, Sue mentioned the hard. So that's like the path in these ancient fields. They'd have a path by the field. If the soil falls on that hard ground, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to lie there on the surface. Well, it's not going to lie there very long because the birds are flying. And so they swoop down and they say, hey, thank you. And that's their meal. So that doesn't go anywhere. And then the rocky, or the part with the weeds, it's pretty good soil, but unfortunately other stuff is growing there too. And any of you who are gardeners know this, that your plants and the weeds, if you don't do anything with the weeds, it's no contest. So a lot of people start out with nice gardens in May, and by June, if you haven't tended it, the weeds got it. So that kind of crowds it out. So Jesus talked about the different kinds of hearts. The hard heart, the shallow heart, the heart that's distracted by other things that are going on in its life. But what I want you also to look at is the sower. Why didn't that sower just plant in the good ground? Why did that sower just throw it out there in all these different types of soils? That's not good farming.
Because Christ died for the whole world, not just the elect.
All right. So here you go with Christ died for the whole world. So that's what God does, isn't it? He loves everybody. So Adam and Eve did not like him after they ate off the tree, and they were ashamed, and they were naked, and they were guilty, and they were blaming him, and they were blaming each other. And so they didn't really want to talk to God. But God wanted to talk to them. He still loved them. He would not quit. So I just want you to think about how important that grace of God is. That he is really asking you and I to have that same vision and to have that same, carelessness that, okay, I'm going to love and I may not get anything back, and not worry about it and do it anyway because we just don't know. And I think another part of that parable and what Jesus was saying to us in telling us that story is none of this is permanent. So that soil may be hard today, but that doesn't mean it's going to be hard tomorrow. And one of the things I learned about farming, and this was more with weeds, is that we would go out there and, again, we would attack them and we'd spray them, and the next year, there's still weeds coming up. Well, where'd they come from? Those weed seeds. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say the weeds spread their own seeds.
They spread their own seed. And the interesting thing about these seeds is they don't always sprout right away. So some may sprout that first year, and some may lie dormant. They may have gotten buried a little deeper, and then as the farmer worked the soil, then they got worked up, and they got up a little closer to the surface, and the circumstances were more favorable. And so they sprouted the second year. And maybe some of them came the third year. So this is all to remind us of the possibility of change. That you think you're wasting your time. Have you ever heard somebody say, I talked until I was blue in the face? Yeah, that means that you repeated that lecture to that child for about the 500th time. And they could repeat it back to you, chapter and verse, if you would allow them to. And they're kind of like, yada, yada, yada. And then, 10 years later, what you said clicked in. And for some reason, it germinated at that point. And your kid says, I remember in 1994 when you said, and you kind of fall over. So it's that idea again that even if it looks like we're planting and we're nurturing and nothing is happening, something is. So I want that to be an encouragement to you because nurturing and loving is hard work, isn't it? There are a lot of days when you don't seem to be getting any yield. A lot of days when it looks like you're just throwing that stuff up there and it's just blowing away. So nothing is ever wasted, I think, in the kingdom of God. And he always wants to encourage us with that. So as we continue to think about nurturing, another thing I want you to think about is who are people that we don't see? So when you go to the store, you really see the checkout person? You see the people that are walking the aisles, doing their shopping? Or are you just kind of focused on you got your list, you got your things that you need? Are you like me, in and out? I pride myself, I'm kind of a time efficiency person, so I look at the list and I'm saying, I can do this in 15. And so I'm focused. And I know where the stuff is in the aisles, and I just want to get that. And I want to get the short checkout line. And I don't want to get behind the person who has lots of coupons. And then some of them are expired, and then there's an argument. And so I just want to get in and out. But who might be in that store not having a good day? Who might be somebody that I could look at, have a little interaction with? Just say, how's it going? Could be the checkout. The green hair is a little off-putting, but you know, I could still make eye contact. I could still say, hey, how long you been working here? How you like your job? That might get a conversation going. That also irritates me when the checkout is on the phone with somebody while they're checking me out, and they're having a personal conversation. And I'm saying, that's not customer oriented. So then I can get off on that. And then I get away from, but who are you? And what is your life like? So those are things to be thinking about in that store. And where else do you go? Sometimes you go to the gas station. Sometimes you go to the doctor's office. Have you ever sat in a waiting area? What are people doing while they're waiting? Yeah, on their phones. So, you know, that again is something. What I notice with like the cancer center, where people are coming in and they're going to have chemotherapy or some other type of treatment related to their situation. Again, these folks are all sitting around waiting for their name to get called, and they're always behind, and so then they're irritated because now they're going to be late for their appointment, and then there was something else going on. But I see where people do start talking to each other. Well, what do they have in common with those other strangers in that? Yeah. They all have cancer. And have you heard about soldiers in foxholes? You know, that becomes a brotherhood because you're facing the same things, and you're all scared, and you're all hoping that you're going to make it back home, and you're all homesick, and you're all lonely. And so you pull out the picture of your wife and your kids, and you start talking to your buddy. So the cancer center oftentimes is a lot like that. I remember real clearly that I met these three guys who had gotten to know each other in their cancer struggles. And so then the wives also got to know each other. And they called themselves the Three Amigos. And I thought that was really a cool thing, because they were total strangers until they came together. And they were all doing a transplant. And again, it was very difficult. And they all had their health struggles. So there were lots of ups and downs, and lots of tears, and lots of fear. And they just stuck with each other. So in my mind, that was a beautiful example of nurturing, that they, you know, again, were able to do that with each other. And then one of them died. And so again, you know, then the other two had to face that not everybody gets the cure. Not everybody gets the outcome that they were hoping for. And so now their nurture to the two of them that were left, you know, they were consoling each other, they were grieving together. So you can see how nurture changes as the circumstances change. So does that raise any thoughts or questions in your mind as you think about situations you've seen? Sue?
I think sometimes it takes a turn of events that forces people to slow down, forces people to get out of their routine, that allows them to connect and to kind of reevaluate where they are in life, in order to have that nurturing and mutual support take place. If we are so wound up in our daily routine and the way we live our lives and our plans, we just never get out of that.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that, Sue, too. The idea of getting out of our normal pattern that we are in. So I think that's a huge thing at Froedtert, is that all of these people have been taken out of their pattern. And they've been put into this environment now where, again, it's life-threatening, it's life-changing, it is just messing up everything. You've heard that expression, life is what happens while you're making other plans. Nowhere is that more true than in that environment. All these people had plans. So many people talk to me about, I just retired, and we were going to go to Italy. We were booked on a cruise, and we had to cancel that because now I'm under treatment. So life happens, and they hadn't planned that, they weren't expecting that, and it just throws you totally off of everything that you know and that you sometimes believe. And so now people are saying, well, what does this mean? And where is this going? And why did this happen? And, those are really, really important questions. So again, the nurture enters into that. And I think what Catherine said before, we listen to each other. My favorite form of nurturing is listening. I sometimes am with a person for an hour and maybe say 2 words. And that's nurturing. A couple of weeks ago, I came into the chapel and we were going to take the prayer requests. People come in the chapel and they grab a little slip of paper and they write down their prayer request. And then they stick it in these niches in the chapel wall. And we collect those. And then we read them, we pray over them. So I came in there to get prepared for that, and this lady was sitting there. And I just said to her, I said, I don't want to disturb you, but I just want you to know that we're going to be coming in and we're going to be doing this, just so that, and you're welcome to stay. And she said, no, she said, I'll go to the family center. But then she started to tell me about her husband with pancreatic cancer, and they had flown in from New York City because they liked this doctor at Froedtert, and flight was delayed, and it was just a nightmare. And so she was just, hanging by a thread. So she left, and after we got done, I went to the family center, and we talked for an hour. And I listened, because this lady had lost her mother, the family dog died, her husband's got pancreatic cancer, and she's just like, it's overload, it's too much. And sometimes it is, isn't it? Sometimes it's just too much. But the nurturing, so again, you can't solve everything. You can't fix everything. You can't tell them everything. But we began that day with, there's somebody here. God sends people into our lives. They may be strangers. Maybe somebody we wouldn't even think about talking to. So that's where she started to get that idea that God was not against her, that God was still there. Any other thoughts on nurture? But there's really a big field out there, isn't there? So if you ever have a point where you're saying, you know, I'm bored, I don't have anything to do, you know, then you can just start thinking about that bigger field that's there. All right, I'd like to move on to the next. So we're on the bottom of the page, and we're going to talk about correction. So there's a time to plant, and there is a time to uproot. Now, in a way, that sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it? Why would you plant something and then uproot it? That just doesn't seem like a good idea. So that's not exactly what the writer is talking about. Does anybody recognize what implement that is that the farmer has on his tractor there?
Cultivator?
Cultivator. All right, we got somebody with a little farm background there. That is a cultivator. It's a little squiggly, but what you can see, so you got your corn rows, and we're in between the rows, and so in between the rows are these metal, they look kind of like shovels, and so they go into the dirt. And what do they do? They loosen the dirt, and anything else?
Pull the weeds up.
Yeah. They uproot. Okay, here's the word now. There's a time to uproot. So they uproot the weeds, because the corn isn't the only thing that grows. And as I mentioned to you before, there are always weed seeds in that soil along with the corn. So if you've ever watched farm fields, when they plant in May and then you get a little rain, you know, then maybe towards the middle, toward the end of May, then the corn starts to come up. And so when the corn is about that high, maybe 3-4 inches high, the weeds are also pretty much about that height as well. So you're basically looking at a field that's all green. And so the farmer knows if he doesn't do anything with those weeds, they're going to take all the moisture, they're going to grow maybe more rapidly than the corn, and then you're not going to have any corn. So you have to cultivate. You got to get those weeds out of there. So you first start when the corn is very short out of the ground. So now imagine that you're on the cultivator, and you can't go too fast because you're going to throw dirt on the corn and bury the corn. So you got to go kind of slow. And that's just a killer. I just remember my dad, you know, you got to look down, you got to stay on the row, and you're going slow, and it just takes forever. So, you know, he had terrible neck and back pain just from maintaining that position and having to do that. You'll notice that this corn is quite a bit taller. This corn is about knee high. Well, if he cultivated it when it was just out of the ground, why is he cultivating it now?
The weeds keep growing.
The weeds keep coming, yeah. You cut those suckers off, you bury them, you tear them up, and you don't get them all. Or the ones that you get, they regenerate. I tell you, weeds are pesky little critters. They just don't quit. So you have to come back a second time. And normally my father would cultivate 3 times. So this is pretty tall now. You're kind of getting to that point where if it gets too much taller, you're going to break it off with the machinery. So this is probably the last time through. Well, now you can crank her up. You can really let her go. You can get into 3rd gear, maybe 4th gear if you feel wild and racy. And then the cultivating goes much faster, and it's a lot more fun. So I think that was probably when my dad taught me how to cultivate. And so he stood on the back of the tractor and yelled encouragement into my ear. Left, right. And then I had a crick in my neck because I was tense. But he kind of thought, well, okay, maybe he'll do better if I'm not yelling in his ear. So he went home. And then I kept going. And then I kind of got the hang of it. And then I got kind of cocky. I thought, I can go another gear. And so I was so proud. I got that field done. And so I come home, I said, hey, Dad, yeah, I got her done. And he went out and walked the field and saw every row where I was going too fast and got off the row and cultivated out some of the crop. And so I didn't get the attaboy that I thought I deserved because I got it done. He wasn't about speed, he was about accuracy. But the weeding, the weeding is a constant process. It's a difficult process. It's an unending process. So that's what I want you to think about as we move into this area of correction. So what does it mean to correct people? How do we know people need correction? If you want to think little kids, when do you say no to a little child?
For sure when it comes to safety.
Safety is always an issue. And so when they run for the stairs, and there's, like 12 or 14 stairs to fall down, what do you say? Stop, yeah. No! And maybe you're even lunging across the room to catch them before they do. And have you ever noticed that when you say no to a child, what does the child say? Really? Why? So I just have memories of with little children, when you say no, they look at me, and maybe I've said to them, no, don't touch that, and then they reach out again. Because, did you really mean I shouldn't touch that? Are you sure? Because I really want to touch it. Because I know if I open that cupboard, there's going to be something really interesting in there. So it is not uncommon that when we say no, and when we try to stop, and when we try to keep safe, the child isn't going to believe us. And they're going to try it anyway. So then what? Then how does correction proceed from there? Do you just say, oh, well, I tried. I guess I'm just going to have to let them do it.
It won't be too traumatic. You gotta let them do it. You'll have to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Okay. So you do have some choices there. You can let him go ahead and do it and learn the hard way, or
No.
yeah, you keep reminding him again with that idea. And a lot of people say this about learning. The mother of learning is repetition. And I think back. Yeah, go ahead.
They get disciplined.
They need discipline. All right. Now, I just, I'm kind of an observer of how society changes. So I grew up with pretty strict discipline. My mother and dad did not fool around. And my mother was not afraid to use the yardstick. So I still, yeah, ooh, okay, Mom, I think I understand what you're saying. So corporal punishment was not unknown. And then as Jean and I got married and had family, we also used corporal punishment. I spanked my children. I think it's unheard of now, isn't it? I think you're going to get a call from social services if you use corporal punishment. You know, and I kind of look back on that like, yeah, okay, I probably could have made my point without having to be physical. I could have, you know, restricted, taken away privileges, and that's kind of what I did with my older children. So when my son went to the gas station and hit one of those pylons that protect the gas pumps and dented the bumper, I noticed, and he didn't say anything. He was hoping I wouldn't notice. And so I brought it up, and he said, oh, I didn't think you'd notice. Yeah. Trust me, I'm your father. I noticed those things. So, you know, that was kind of the warning shot over the bow then that, you know, I said to them, I'm not happy, you know, insurance, you know, this is my car. It's a privilege that you get to borrow it and use it. And so that was the correction at that point. And then several weeks later, I got a call from the Waukesha County Sheriff, and he said, your son was doing wheelies in this county park, tearing up the grass. And I said, oh, all right. And he had told me that he was not going to Waukesha when he borrowed the car that day. So, you know, then the correction took the form of, I held out my hand. I said, give me the keys. And I said, now you're not driving my car anymore. Did he say thank you for the correction? No. What do you think he said? Yeah.
It's not fair.
Yeah. Sorry, I got caught. No, he didn't even say that. He was just not fair. It's not, you know, he was angry. Yeah, you can't do that and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, what I want you to be thinking about in terms of this work of correction, this is really hard stuff. You know, we talked about nurture, and nurturing is hard because, again, it takes a lot of effort and time. But I think correction is twice as hard because it's very rare that people say, thank you for correcting me. That's probably going to happen quite rarely. So how do we keep on correcting when we don't get thanked and when we meet resistance? Why would we even bother continuing to do it?
I don't think it has anything to do with how it makes us feel. I think it's in a certain respect, you're not doing it to be loved, you're not doing it to be thanked for it, you're doing it because you know it's best for that person.
So you're not doing it because, again, it makes you feel good or you're going to get something out of it. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. I really want to lift that up and stress how important that is. I don't know how many parents I have talked to who said, I can't correct my child because I want them to be my friend. Have you heard that? Yeah. I really think that is a very prevalent thought in the lives of parents today, who are very afraid to discipline and use correction because their kids are going to get mad at them. Because their kids are going to say, I hate you. And, all those kind of things. So if you're looking at it from the standpoint of, how this is going to affect your feelings, then discipline is going to be almost impossible. Because you don't want to have that reaction. So I think that was always in my mind, that I am disciplining you because I know this is what God wants me to do. Because he said, you're the adult. You know the implications. You know the long term. You were a child yourself. And so, from your own mistakes, you know these things. So I think that's what really drove me, that I knew people were not going to like it. I knew there would be pushback. I knew that things would be said that would hurt my heart, but I kept that long view. So now we've been talking about parents and children, but what other areas of correction are out there?
The role of friend, if you're a real friend to somebody and you care about their life, if you see them caught in something really bad, like say an addiction or a bad lifestyle, I mean, you're going to want to say something to them to kind of say, hey, you're headed for some real serious trouble here.
Yeah. So, again, think about friendships then. And I think we have all had friends through the years where we saw that kind of situation, where we saw our friend kind of going down the rabbit hole. And so true friends, they speak up, don't they? Now, what might happen to the friendship then if we confront that friend and they don't want to hear it? It could cost us the friendship, couldn't it? And again, we have to be looking at that, it was not a real friendship if I couldn't be honest, if I couldn't tell you the truth, if I couldn't really, try to help you to see something that you're having difficulty looking at. So sometimes friendships do fracture because we try to correct. And again, I think you keep that long view. It was still what I needed to do. What may happen down the road after the friendship broke is that friend does, see the truth. And they do figure it out. And they call you up and they say, thank you. Thank you for what you said. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't listen. But now we're talking about the seed again. It may germinate later on. So friendships. Any other areas?
The government has a Department of Corrections.
Okay. The House of Correction. Yeah. Yeah, so you can get into the Justice Department. And so again, if people break the law, then they end up in the prison system. So we call it the DOC, the Department of Corrections. How's that working? Anybody ever pay any attention to that? Do you know how many inmates we have in the state of Wisconsin? I think in my mind, I'm thinking of like 25,000, something like that. People are in prison in various institutions throughout the state.
There should be more in prison.
more people should be in prison, okay? Okay? Well, can you lock them all up? I mean, do we have the capacity? You know, that's one problem. Most of the prisons are already overcrowded, so we don't have the capacity. Can we afford to build more prisons?
Some arguments, some theologians have made that for certain things, the just thing to do is an execution for the prisoner's sake.
Okay.
When you approach death, you are forced to think about things differently than you would have if you knew I'm just going to be sitting in this cell for the next 20 years.
So if you execute, they'll really wake up? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe not all of them, but those, many of them.
All right, well, you know, go ahead, Sue.
Say it shows the necessity of prison ministries, because if you've got somebody in that situation where they have pretty much bottomed out in life, maybe then they're willing to hear something different, a different message.
All right. Yeah, so you not only, put them behind bars and slam the door, but then you also continue to say they're a human being and they have a soul, and maybe now that they're in a confinement, if somebody talked with them, it might kind of help them to evaluate and look at their life and figure things out. So this is something that has always, kind of puzzled me in terms of our policies, where the idea I think we usually had was punitive. All right, we have to punish people for doing wrong. But then we've also had this thought, but we should also rehabilitate, because many of these people are going to come back out into society. So if we rehabilitate them, then they can be a productive member of society. So we're kind of back and forth on which policy do we really want to use.
I represented the Sheriff's Department for 20 years. The sheriff maintains the jail, which is pretrial detainees versus convicted people that go to prison or to the House of Correction.
Yeah.
And one time I took a young woman in our office along with a tour of other people. We periodically tour the jail to look at conditions. We went through one of the cell blocks, and in that cell block, everybody was so well behaved, on their best behavior, better manners, yes sir, no sir, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We came out later and she said, so that would be the low-level misdemeanors, right? And I said, no, those were the hardest core guys. Those were the guys that were the narcs, they were the murderers. That was the worst cell block in the entire facility. And the thing to come away with is all those guys were looking for a deal before they showed up before the judge.
Yeah.
And they knew that if they were on their best behavior, they would look good and the judge might take that into account. So they knew how to be good.
Yeah.
And left to their own devices back out on the streets, they wouldn't be.
Yeah. You've got that going on too. It's what they call the con game. You know, that people do know how to manipulate. And, so you have to take all of that into consideration. You have to understand human beings. You have to understand what they do. I did some jail ministry myself. I went to county jail, and again, a lot of the Milwaukee County Jail people are also pre-trial. And so again, that's true. And I certainly was manipulated on more than one occasion myself. Having said that, I still wanted to kind of look beyond all of that to say, who are you inside there? What are you thinking? What's is there any redeeming qualities there? You see, and God is always looking at people like, all right, I see all that stuff. Jesus saw those tax collectors. He saw those street walkers. He see all those people that everybody else looked down on, and he said, I'd like to have dinner with you. And then, they talked, and then things happened, and they changed, and some became his disciples. So I think, all of that is out there. And in my mind, it's kind of messy. But I really liked going to the jail because, those guys were not only manipulative, but they were also real. And, they didn't pretend. They didn't try to show me something that would make me look at them favorably. They showed me who they were. And then we could talk. And we would do these Bible studies. And, a lot of the favorite stories that they could relate to was the prodigal son. So, yeah, the guy wastes everything. He blows it. He messes up big time. So, and a lot of these guys were in that situation. They were estranged from family. Nobody came from the family anymore. Nobody wanted to talk to them, wanted to see them, wanted to write them. So they were just totally on their own. They'd burned all their bridges. So again, correction, it's helpful, I think, for people to be taken out of circulation. It's helpful for them to, and a lot of these guys would talk about that on the street they were going, and they never stopped to think. They never looked at the implications of their actions. They never looked at where is this going. And now they're in the cell and they're thinking. And that, that begins to help them to start looking in another direction. But then at that point, if you don't have anybody to talk to, if you don't have anybody who can show you a scripture, if you don't have anybody who gives you some love and encouragement, then you're probably not going to get corrected. Then you're probably going to come out and you're going to go back to where you were. You know what the rate of recidivism is? How many guys out of prison go back? 80%? Not too far off. I think it's kind of in that neighborhood. Probably like at least 75%. So, does that mean it's their fault, or is it the system? So again, if you're thinking of rehabilitation but you don't have any programs, and when they make cuts in the budget, the programs go first, because you got to have guards, so all those kind of things happen. So I'm just saying that it's that whole field of corrections is crying for ministry. Now, who wants to go into the jail and be a volunteer? Go ahead.
I think as a society, people that veer to the left, at least in my view, aren't willing to admit that there is a significant portion of the population that is incapable of rational thought, and when they see you, they're just going to make a sucker out of you. So the sooner you lock them up and throw the key away, tell them they're coming out of your feet first, we got a hole over here to put you in, and that's the end of it. As a society, we have trouble dealing with that idea. And as long as we have that idea, we're going to continue to be manipulated by these kinds of folks.
There's a lot of crime out there, and I think we're all alarmed by the Kia boys and just this kind of rampant no thought for property or for people. So that is a huge concern for all of us. For me, as a child of God, I am also going to try to hang on to, can we reach? Can we correct? Can we get through? So I'm not just going to throw people in a hole. All right, we're at 10:15 today, so I want you to think some more about your own experiences with being corrected and correcting, and how did that all work for you? So we'll spend some more time on that. See you next week.